She bought a rusty 1970s RV for just $300. And what she did next left the entire town in tears. No money, no help, just a broken heart, a box of tools, and a dream she refused to bury. This female mechanic didn't just restore a broken rig, she restored something far greater. But this isn't just a story about restoring an old RV. It's about rebuilding a life. Stay with us because what happens inside this tiny home on wheels might just change how you see second chances forever. But before we dive in, tell us where are you watching from? We love seeing our global family in the comments. Let's get started. The morning sun barely filtered through the dusty blinds of a rundown garage apartment on the edge of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Paint peeled from the walls like forgotten stories, and the radiator let out a soft wheeze, the only sound breaking the stillness. At 47, Rosie Walker sat on the edge of a creaky twin bed, calloused hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, half filled with coffee that had gone cold hours ago. She hadn't always lived this way. Once, she was Tulsa's only certified female diesel mechanic, respected, reliable, fierce. But after her mother passed, and the repair shop she'd worked at for 2 decades shut its doors, life unraveled thread by thread. Her apartment was more tool shed than home. Now wrenches hung above the sink, oil-stained rags piled near the heater, and a single photo frame stood silently on a dusty shelf, a younger Rosie, with a woman whose smile could outshine the Oklahoma sun. Charlotte, her partner, her compass. Charlotte had been gone for 4 years now, taken by a sudden aneurysm. No warnings, no chances to say goodbye. Since then, Rosie had become something of a ghost in her own life. But all that was about to change with $300 and a rust-covered dream on wheels. It started with a listing buried deep in a dusty corner of an online marketplace. 1970s Winnebago, rusted, no engine, $300 OBO, must tow. The photo was grainy, just a hunched, moss-streaked beast of a thing parked under an oak tree, its windows fogged with age and neglect. Most people would have scrolled right past it, but Rosie Walker didn't. She stared at it for a long time. Something about the shape, the way it slouched like it had a story to tell, it stirred something in her. She clicked on the ad. The seller had left just a line. Belonged to my uncle. Been sitting since '92. Hate to junk it. That night, Rosie sat at her small kitchen table, the glow of the laptop screen casting shadows across the walls. Her heart thudded not from excitement, but from fear. What was she thinking? She didn't have a plan. No place to tow it to. Barely enough in her savings to cover gas, let alone a restoration. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the grief, the rust, the silence, a tiny voice whispered, "Do it." So she did. The next morning, she borrowed a friend's trailer and drove 3 hours to a forgotten stretch of land near McAlester. The RV sat like a fallen monument, half buried in weeds, a squirrel darting across the cracked windshield. The man selling it was in his 60s, thin as a scarecrow, and offered no resistance when she handed him the cash. "It's got good bones, I think," he muttered, squinting at her skeptically. "But it'll break your back." Rosie just nodded. "It already has." It took the better part of a day to winch it onto the trailer. The wheels locked. One of the support beams cracked mid-lift, and the whole shell groaned like it didn't want to move. But eventually, with sweat, curse words, and a crowbar, they got it on. Rosie hauled it to the only place she could think of, the overgrown patch of land her mother had left her just outside of town. A place she hadn't visited in years. The gate was rusted shut, the grass waist-high, the air thick with stillness. But it was hers. She parked the RV beneath a cluster of pines and stood back, staring at the faded Brave logo on its side. The letters were chipped, barely legible. "Yeah," she whispered, almost smiling. "Brave sounds about right." That night, Rosie didn't sleep. She sat outside the RV, wrapped in an old hoodie, sipping coffee from a metal thermos. The stars blinked overhead, and every now and then, an owl hooted in the dark. She kept looking at the RV, not with dread, but with a strange sort of tenderness, like meeting someone who's broken in the same place as you are. By morning, she had made up her mind. She cracked open the door, which screamed on its hinges, and stepped inside. The smell hit her first mold, rust, and something sour like time left too long in the sun. Dust floated like spirits in the air. The floor was soft in places, the ceiling sagging with water stains. But she walked the length of it anyway, her boots stirring scraps of fabric and old beer cans. At the very back, under a pile of rotted cushions, she found a faded photograph glued to the wall, two smiling teenagers in bell-bottoms, holding hands at the Grand Canyon. Someone had loved this place once. She decided to love it again. The first week was demolition. Rosie yanked out everything: rotted cabinets, collapsing shelves, carpet so stained it fought back. She worked with a crowbar in one hand and a respirator mask strapped tight across her face. By day, she fought mold and decay. By night, she nursed sore muscles with Epsom salt baths in a plastic tub and scrawled ideas in a greasy notepad. Neighbors started to notice. An old man walking his dog paused one afternoon and called across the fence, "You fixing that thing or burying it?" Rosie grinned. Maybe both. On the 7th day, she found something that stopped her in her tracks. While prying open a rust-welded drawer near the kitchenette, she discovered a stack of yellowed manuals, and between them, a journal. Inside, in looping cursive, were notes from the original owner, sketches, road trip routes, gas station receipts, little drawings of desert sunsets and roadside diners, and taped to the last page a love note. "To you, my co-pilot. This journey has always been ours." Rosie closed the book, tears burning behind her eyes. She wasn't just restoring a vehicle, she was resurrecting a story. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. 3 weeks in, and Rosie Walker had officially reached the "what the hell am I doing" stage of the project. The RV had been stripped to its bones, nothing but bare aluminum walls, exposed wires, and the scent of elbow grease. Her hands were raw, her back screamed every morning, and the mosquitoes in the tall Oklahoma grass treated her like a 5-star buffet. But still, every day she showed up, one plank at a time, one bolt at a time, one memory at a time. One afternoon, as she knelt beneath the rig, wrestling with a rusted support beam, a low rumble cut through the summer stillness. "A truck, big one." She scrambled out, wiping grease on her jeans, just as a matte black pickup rolled to a stop near the fence line. Dust billowed around it. The driver door creaked open, and a woman stepped out, tall, strong frame, denim shirt, mirrored sunglasses, and a smirk that looked like it belonged to someone who had nothing to prove. "You Rosie Walker?" the woman asked, voice low and direct. Rosie hesitated. "Who's asking?" The woman pulled off her sunglasses and tucked them into her shirt. "Name's Grace Delaney. I run the salvage yard over in Broken Arrow. You called last week about reclaimed paneling." Rosie exhaled, tension dropping from her shoulders. Didn't expect a personal delivery. "I didn't come to deliver," Grace said, eyes scanning the RV. "I came to see who had the guts to take this wreck on." Rosie chuckled. "You're looking at her." Grace walked slowly around the RV, nodding. "She's a mess." She's my mess." There was a pause. Grace folded her arms. "You got help on this?" Rosie shook her head. "Just me, my dog-eared manual, and a stubborn streak that's somehow still functioning." Grace whistled low. "You're either brave, crazy, or grieving." Rosie looked away, her jaw tightening. Maybe all three. Grace didn't press. Just tapped the side of the RV and said, "Well, if you need backup, I've got scrap tools and time I'm not using. I'll leave my number." She scribbled it on a receipt and handed it to Rosie. "Good luck. Rosie Walker." Rosie watched her drive off, heart pounding for reasons she didn't entirely understand. That night, a storm rolled in out of nowhere. Oklahoma was famous for that bright sunshine 1 minute, sideways rain the next. Rosie had just finished patching a leak in the roof when the sky cracked open. Thunder shook the earth, and wind howled through the clearing like a ghost. Inside the RV, the ceiling trembled. Water poured through a seam she hadn't sealed yet, soaking the subfloor. Rosie scrambled to throw down towels, slipping on the slick vinyl. A gust of wind slammed the door open, snapping it off one hinge. The entire structure groaned under the weight of the storm. For the first time since starting the project, she panicked. She grabbed her flashlight, ducked into the rain, and began frantically securing the tarp that had blown half off the roof. Mud clung to her boots. Her jeans were soaked through. Every muscle screamed for her to stop, but she didn't. Not until the tarp was back in place and she had anchored it with cinder blocks. By the time the storm passed, Rosie was drenched, shaking, and near tears. She crawled into the RV, sat on the one dry spot left an overturned milk crate, and stared at the wreckage. Water damage, tools scattered, insulation ruined. Why had she thought she could do this? Then, her eyes landed on the journal, the one from the original owners. It had stayed dry, tucked in a plastic bag inside her toolbox. She pulled it out with trembling fingers and flipped to the last page again. "This journey has always been ours." She closed her eyes and let the silence settle. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Rosie was back at it. She drained the flooded panels, tore out the ruined insulation, remeasured every board. She worked through the pain, the doubt, and the exhaustion. By late afternoon, a truck pulled up again. Grace stepped out, holding 2 boxes. "Didn't hear from you," she said, "but I figured you'd need this." Inside the boxes were salvaged oak planks, a new door hinge, and a gallon of marine-grade sealant. Rosie looked at her, too stunned to speak. Grace shrugged. "Storm chewed up half of Tulsa. Figured you got hit too." Rosie blinked hard, her voice cracking. "Thank you." Grace smiled. "You're not the only one who's patched something together out of broken parts." That evening, they worked side by side. 2 women, a rusted RV, and a stubborn refusal to quit. For the first time in a long time, Rosie didn't feel like she was just rebuilding a vehicle. She was rebuilding herself. It had been just over a month since Rosie Walker bought the old RV, and for the first time in years, her mornings had meaning. She no longer reached for her phone or stared blankly at the ceiling, wishing the day away. Instead, she pulled on her work boots, rolled up her sleeves, and stepped out into the rising light where sawdust danced in the air, and the scent of pine and grease clung to her clothes like comfort. Each morning began with a cup of black coffee and a walk around the RV. Not for any practical reason, just a habit she had started. She'd circle the perimeter, her hand brushing the newly painted trim, inspecting every detail. It was as if the rig was speaking to her, reminding her, "We're still standing. You and me." The transformation wasn't flashy, It was quiet, honest, real. With Grace's help and a few late-night YouTube tutorials, Rosie had reinforced the floor, rewired half the rig, and installed reclaimed cabinets from a church renovation. She'd learned how to patch aluminum, how to seal leaks with patience instead of force. She painted the ceiling a warm cream, letting the light reflect off it softly, and covered the windows with hand-stitched curtains made from Charlotte's old flannel shirts. Everything in the RV carried a story, and maybe that was the point. One Thursday morning, as Rosie sanded the edges of a built-in bench, she heard footsteps on gravel. She turned to see a teenage girl standing near the fence, her hoodie pulled tight, hands shoved in her pockets. "You live here?" the girl asked, voice cautious but curious. Rosie nodded, setting down her sander, sort of working on it. The girl tilted her head. "It's an RV. Used to be. Now it's a dream in progress." A pause. Then the girl stepped closer, eyes scanning the half-finished interior through the open door. "My name's Lily," she said. "I saw it from the road. My mom and I live 2 blocks down. She thought it was a meth lab or something." Rosie laughed. "Well, tell your mom it's just wood, rust, and a whole lot of hope." That afternoon, Lily came back, this time with a sketchbook. "Mind if I draw it?" she asked. Rosie waved her in. "Be my guest." Lily spent an hour sitting on the overturned crate, pencil scratching softly across the page. Before she left, she looked around the RV one last time. "It's weird," she said. "It feels safe." Rosie swallowed the lump in her throat. "It's meant to." Word spread. A few days later, an elderly man with a walker appeared, offering a box of brass knobs he'd salvaged from a Victorian dresser. "Figured you could use 'em," he muttered. Then came a young couple with a toddler, bringing leftover laminate flooring from their own remodel. Next, a woman from the local thrift store offered Rosie an old propane stove in exchange for help fixing her car's timing belt. Each time, Rosie said the same thing. "This place is open to everyone, as long as you bring something, tools, time, stories, anything." And they did. Someone painted a small wooden sign that read "Wander Home." They nailed it to a post beside the RV, right above a row of hand-planted herbs Rosie and Lily had started. The RV had become more than a project, more than a personal escape. It was becoming a sanctuary. That shift began to change Rosie, too. She laughed more, ate real meals again, let herself feel things that had been buried under oil and grief for far too long. One night, as she and Grace shared a quiet dinner under the soft hum of string lights, Rosie looked up and said, "I don't know how this became what it is." Grace smiled, chewing slowly before replying, "You gave it purpose. People just followed that light." Rosie didn't answer right away. She watched the trees sway beyond the clearing, the stars poking through the dusk. "I thought I'd be alone forever," she whispered. Grace reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on Rosie's scarred knuckles. "You're not alone. Rosie Walker. Not anymore." That night, Rosie sat inside the RV alone. The floor beneath her was solid, the walls warm. Charlotte's photo hung above the window, framed in cedar. The lantern flickered on its hook, casting shadows that no longer felt haunted. She opened her journal and wrote, "I thought I was rebuilding a machine. Turns out, I was rebuilding myself. One screw at a time, one breath at a time. Maybe you can't fix everything. But sometimes, fixing something is how you survive." And when she closed the book, she felt it. Not peace exactly, but purpose. And it was more than enough. The first email came on a Sunday morning, tucked between spam messages and a parts order confirmation. The subject line read simply, "We saw your RV." Rosie almost deleted it without opening, thinking it was junk. But something about it, maybe the lack of emojis or exclamation points, felt real. So she clicked. "Hi, Rosie. I hope this isn't intrusive. My name is Aaron, and I help organize the Women in Trades Collective here in Tulsa. One of our members drove past your RV last week and told us what you're building. She said you're a mechanic and doing the whole thing by hand. We think that's incredible. Would you be willing to speak at our monthly meetup, just 15 minutes? Talk about the restoration, your journey, anything you'd like. No pressure. Either way, we're cheering you on. Warmly, Aaron McAdams." Rosie read the message twice, then leaned back in her chair. Speak to a group of strangers. She hadn't stood in front of a crowd since high school, and even then, she'd mumbled her way through a science fair presentation on carburetors and nearly passed out from the nerves. She was a mechanic, not a speaker, not a leader, not someone people looked up to. But then her eyes drifted to the wall above the RV's small fold-down desk. There, taped beside Charlotte's photo, was Lily's pencil sketch of the RV labeled "Sanctuary in Progress." Maybe it was time to stop hiding behind her work. Rosie took a deep breath, typed a short reply, "I'd be honored," and hit send before she could second-guess herself. The day of the event, Rosie scrubbed the grease from her hands until her skin burned. She pulled on the cleanest pair of jeans she owned, braided her hair back, and packed a few photos of the restoration process before and after shots. The journal from the original owners, even the salvaged brass knobs she'd polished to a shine. The meeting was held at a repurposed fire station downtown, now a co-op and makerspace. Rosie stepped inside, boots echoing on concrete floors, and nearly turned around when she saw the size of the crowd. 30, maybe 40 women sat in a semicircle, some in overalls, some in coveralls, some with ink-stained fingers, others with dirt under their nails. All of them looked up as she entered. "Rosie Walker?" a woman called from across the room. She nodded, throat dry. "We're so glad you came." They gave her a mug of hot tea, led her to a simple platform at the front, and asked if she needed notes or slides. "No," she said. "Just me." She cleared her throat. "So, I bought a busted 1970s RV for $300. A few chuckles, a few nods. And at the time, I didn't know if I was fixing it, or if it was fixing me." She told them about the storm, about Grace, about Lily, about the photo she'd found taped to the wall and how it made her believe the RV had a heartbeat. She told them that some days, she still wasn't sure what she was building, but every screw, every splinter, every ache in her bones made her feel more human than she had in years. When she finished, the room was quiet. Then came the applause, not polite, not out of obligation. It was real. Afterward, women came up one by one. "I'm restoring a boat." One said, "Alone. Now I know I'm not crazy. My husband always told me trades weren't for girls." Another whispered, "I wish he could see you. My daughter wants to meet you." A third added, holding up her phone, "She's 13, she wants to be a mechanic, too." Rosie felt like she couldn't breathe, but not from panic, from pride. When she got home that night, the RV glowed in the dark, string lights twinkling like stars around its roofline. She stepped inside and found a note on the counter. It was from Grace. "Saw your talk. You were amazing. Dropped off a surprise out back." Rosie rushed outside. There, sitting beneath a tarp, was an old wood-burning stove, small, compact, and perfect for the RV. Taped to it was a yellow sticky note. "You've built a home. Thought it should have a heart." Rosie didn't cry often, but she did then. She stayed up until midnight, installing the stove with shaking hands. When the fire finally caught, flickering softly behind the glass, she sat on the floor with her journal and wrote, "It started as a rebuild, now it's a movement. And maybe I meant to lead it. The RV wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to every woman who had ever been told she couldn't, who dared to try anyway, and who turned rust into rebirth. The fire in the little stove crackled softly, sending waves of warmth through the restored shell of the RV. Rosie Walker sat beside it, her grease-streaked journal open on her lap, a cup of chamomile tea in hand, her boots kicked off, socks mismatched, exhaustion clinging to her shoulders like an old friend. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, but inside the RV it felt safe, sacred, even. This wasn't the life she had planned. Not after Charlotte. Not after losing her job. But for the first time in years. She wasn't trying to escape her life. She was inhabiting it. Still, something lingered. Something unfinished. That something came in the form of an envelope, creased, faded, sealed and buried under a pile of Charlotte's old receipts and repair invoices. Rosie found it while reorganizing the drawer under the bench seat, looking for a missing Allen key. The envelope had no address, just her name on the front, in Charlotte's handwriting. Her heart stopped, hands trembling. She sat down slowly, staring at it. The air in the RV seemed to still, as if the space itself was holding its breath. She opened it. Rosie, if you're reading this, it means I'm not around anymore, and I hate that. I hate that I won't be there to see your hands rebuild something beautiful, like they always do. You've always seen value in broken things. You even saw it in me. I know grief. I know it'll hollow you out. I wish I could fix that with duct tape and a wrench, like you do everything else. But if there's one thing I've learned from loving you, it's that healing doesn't come in a rush. It comes in layers, in days, in details. So I hope one day you'll build something again, not just because you can, but because you're worthy of having something whole. I love you. Rosie Walker, that's the only thing I know that still feels real. See, Rosie didn't cry, not right away. She folded the letter carefully, reverently, and placed it inside the small wooden box of keepsakes she'd been building in the corner cupboard. Then she lit a candle, pulled her knees to her chest, and let the silence swallow her whole. But the tears came later, in the middle of the night, when the RV creaked in the wind and the fire had died to embers. Her shoulders shook with sobs that had been stored away for years, hidden behind grit and metal and wood. And when she finally slept, it was the deep sleep of someone who had let go. The following morning, Rosie awoke with swollen eyes and sore limbs, but her mind was clear. She opened the journal again and wrote just 5 words. Today I build with grace. And she did. She tore down the uneven shelving she had rushed through earlier and rebuilt it with care. She sanded every corner until it was smooth enough for a child's hand. She reupholstered the bench cushions with fabric Charlotte had once used for curtains in their first apartment. The color was faded sunflower yellow. Later that week, Lily returned this time with her mother. The woman was guarded, polite, clearly unsure. "This is where you've been spending your time?" she asked her daughter. Lily nodded proudly. "It's better than any school project. Rosie teaches me stuff that matters." Her mom looked at Rosie for a long moment. "You teach her. I show her what I've learned." Rosie replied softly. "She does the rest." The woman walked slowly through the RV, running her hand along the window frames, the polished wood, the brass hooks hung neatly by the door. "This was a junk heap," she said, half to herself. Rosie smiled. "Still is, in places. But it's getting there." That afternoon, the 3 of them painted the final section of the RV's exterior together. Lily picked the color a soft, dusky teal. Her mother didn't say much, but she stayed until the sun dipped low and the shadow stretched long across the clearing. Before leaving, she turned to Rosie. "You've given my daughter something I couldn't. A space to believe in." Rosie blinked, her voice barely a whisper. She gave that to herself. I just opened the door. The next day brought more visitors. A retired teacher dropped off a box of poetry books. A young artist offered to paint a mural on the back of the RV, a woman holding a wrench in one hand and a flower in the other. Even Grace showed up unannounced with a homemade pie and 2 new drill bits. "You're building a damn cathedral out here," she said, handing over the tools. Rosie laughed. "More like a patchwork chapel." But Grace just nodded. Sometimes that's where the best prayers get heard. That night, Rosie lit the little wood stove and sat at the fold-down table, now stained honey gold. She placed Charlotte's letter beside her journal, ran her fingers over the handwriting, and breathed in the scent of pine and smoke and fresh sawdust. She closed her eyes and whispered to the quiet. "I'm not lost anymore. Not because everything was perfect, not because the grief was gone, but because she had finally made space for herself inside her own story, and that more than any blueprint or measurement was the true renovation." It was a Saturday evening in late September when it happened. The air was just beginning to carry that first kiss of fall, cool enough for jackets, warm enough for stories. A soft amber light soaked the clearing as Rosie Walker placed the final touch inside the RV, a small wooden plaque above the entryway, hand-carved and stained with linseed oil. It read, "The Heart of the Road, Est, by hands that hurt and healed." She stepped back, rubbing the sawdust from her palms, and let herself breathe. The RV, once a decaying shell of rust and sorrow, now glowed like a living thing. The walls shimmered with restored wood and warmth. The windows, once cracked and dark, sparkled with sunlight and reflections of trees swaying gently in the wind. Woven rugs lined the floors. Plants lined the windowsills. And in one corner, tucked between shelves of books and tools, sat Charlotte's photo, beside the journal and a small tin of sunflower seeds Lily had left with a note. "For whenever you're ready to grow something." And Rosie was ready now. That evening, people started arriving. Lily and her mother came first, arms full of cookies and lemonade. Then came Grace, with her toolbox and a Bluetooth speaker playing soft blues. A group of women from the Trades Collective showed up next, some wearing overalls, others wearing dresses and Doc Martens, all carrying folding chairs and covered dishes. And then, to Rosie's shock, came 2 old co-workers from the diesel shop she once called home. "We saw the article," one of them said, holding up a printed page. "You made the front of the local paper. Rosie Walker and the RV that rebuilt a community." Rosie laughed, the sound escaping her chest like wind breaking free through an open window. They gathered around the fire pit, just beside the RV, where Rosie had laid down gravel and river stones like a welcome mat to something sacred. String lights zigzagged between the trees. The wind chimes Grace had made from old wrenches and spoons clinked gently in the breeze. The night hummed with laughter, crackling logs, and the soft murmur of people who had once been strangers now swapping stories like family. Then someone called out, "Rosie, tell us about the first day." She paused, surprised. "The first day?" "Yeah," said Grace. "When you first saw it, the RV." Rosie leaned back in her chair, staring into the fire. "It looked awful," she said with a grin. "Rotting floor, dead squirrels, mold in every corner, no engine, no hope." A wave of chuckles swept through the circle. "But," she added, her voice softening, "I saw something in it, something that reminded me of myself. I was empty, abandoned, rusted through. But I was still here, still capable of holding something." The fire cracked. "I thought I was building a home," she said, her voice shaking. But what I really built was a way back to myself. Silence fell, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was reverent, holy. Then Lily stood up. I was scared of this place at first. She said, "It looked weird, but Rosie let me in anyway. And now, this place feels more like home than my house does." Rosie looked down, swallowing hard. "And," Lily continued, pulling a piece of paper from her back pocket, "I wrote something. I hope that's okay." She unfolded the paper and read. "Sometimes the broken things are the ones that shine the brightest. Sometimes, what looks abandoned just hasn't been loved in a while." This RV didn't save Rosie. Rosie saved herself, but the RV gave her a reason to begin. Rosie blinked rapidly. Her hands trembled. She reached out and pulled Lily into a hug that felt like it stitched something together in both of them. That night, as the fire burned down to glowing coals and the last lantern flickered beside the RV, Rosie sat alone on the wooden step, feet in the grass, heart in the sky. She looked up. The stars stretched wide above her like road maps written in constellations. And for the first time in a long, long time, she felt completely at home. Not just in the RV, not just in the clearing, but in her life. She had built something that mattered. Not because it was perfect, but because it was honest and shared and earned. Tomorrow, she'd wake up and patch more things, teach Lily how to use a jigsaw, help Grace replace a leaky pipe. She'd keep showing up with dirty hands and a full heart. But tonight was for sitting still. Tonight was for remembering how far she had come. And tonight was for Charlotte, whose memory now lived not in sadness, but in laughter, wood grain, and the sound of Rosie's own voice telling stories by firelight. Sometimes, the things that look the most broken are simply waiting for someone to see them differently. Rosie Walker didn't just restore an old RV, she restored her belief in herself. What began as a desperate attempt to escape grief became a quiet revolution of healing, courage, and connection. She proved that you don't need blueprints to rebuild your life, just persistence, purpose, and a bit of heart. Rosie's story reminds us that when we dare to begin again, even in the smallest ways, we don't just restore a thing, we restore ourselves. And for Rosie and everyone who finds their way back through the wreckage rock bottom, was never the end. It was the foundation. The end. Up next, 2 more stories of transformation and resilience click to continue this journey. And if you believe even broken things can become beautiful again, hit subscribe.